Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Nice to meet you. My name's Jay.
Hey, good to meet you too.
Thanks for doing this. So, I'm a writer for Jersey Jazz Magazine. So, we're going to be featuring you and your Jazz Masters Award win.
Okay, thank you.
So, if I could just get started with that, tell me,
Sure.
wh- tell me what winning that award means to you.
It's one of those things I'm still trying to soak it all in, really. You know what I mean? It's a huge honor. You know what I mean? There's been a lot of my heroes have come before me winning this honor, so it's something that I didn't see coming at
Hmm.
all. But now that it's here, I'm kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing.
Does this award have a different meaning to you than possibly some of the other, you've won a lot of awards. Does it have a special meaning or a different meaning?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the community, you know, that's making the decision. So definitely it means a lot. It's the people who keep an eye on what's happening in our world, and that that's huge, to be recognized by them. Yeah, so it definitely means something different from any other thing that I've won before. you know. Plus, with this award, it's like a stamp on all of your efforts, in your career. It's kind of an interesting thing because, obviously we don't focus on awards as artists, but when they do come, it's kind of a shock to the system, because you're thinking about the next project or what is it that I haven't done? What is it that I'd like to do? It's only when you get to my age and people start talking about your past that you realize what it is that you've done in the past. My eye is always on, what's the next thing that's on the horizon.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. So it's always good to be recognized, I'm sure, but
Mhm.
awards are just fruits of your efforts, right? I mean,
They
but
are, they are. I mean, and unexpected fruits. I guess that's the way to put it for me because there's the real fruit is the work and the response to the work from the fans. You know, and then this is just icing on top of the cake.
sure, sure. So if I can go back, way back, and maybe discuss your upbringing, your New Orleans upbringing.
Well, you know, New Orleans is a town that I would think most people in the world kind of always misunderstand, because we have the label of being the Big Easy. We're known for our food. Obviously, we're known for jazz and, the music that came from there, from Louis Armstrong and all the other greats that have come from the city. But it's also a cultural hub, you know. I found out one of the first art festivals dealing with painting, that is.
Mhm.
Uh, one of the first art festivals in the country was done in New Orleans, and then my father was part of the legacy of those musicians who loved the operatic music, and classical music. So I was around a lot of African Americans who were into that world.
Mm.
And it was an interesting thing because they were never seen, by the general public. But I knew them. Roger Dickinson, my composition teacher, Moses Hogan, who was another great choral arranger and writer who died way too young. My father, Osceola Blanchard. I mean, the list is endless of people who come from the city who had an interest in other types of music other than what most people know us for. So growing up in New Orleans provided me with a wide range of musical interests, you know, um, just because of that, because I saw so many things In my household, it was operating music, it was choral music, church music. Then when I was hanging out, it was jazz, R&B, rock and roll, all of the other stuff, you know. Um, and I wouldn't have it any other way, man. I mean, I really feel very fortunate that I was born and raised in New Orleans because I got a chance to see a lot of things and be influenced by a lot of different people.
Yeah, yeah. I think you bring a really good point. I wrote a book on American music, history of American music, and I was surprised even to learn New Orleans' connection with opera. I think they had three opera houses very early on, and
Yeah.
it's interesting how people really focus, and rightfully so, on the jazz element, but really a
Mhm.
cultural center way beyond jazz.
Yeah, man, I got a chance to actually make a video in the Toulouse Opera House, which was reportedly one of the first opera houses in the country. Um, and it's an interesting thing, because there's still that tradition in New Orleans. Opera Creole is an opera company that's mostly African American controlled and run, and they do a lot for the community. But of course, the New Orleans Opera Company, they've been doing a lot of great things, but that's the stuff that doesn't make the paper, man. It doesn't, when we don't see documentaries done about that. We see documentaries done about all the stuff that we do as jazz musicians and the street musicians and the brass bands and that stuff, you
Right.
know. And and now it's the what's the bounce,
Mhm.
you know, all of that stuff gets the attention. But man, for the longest time, even now, there's been a strong um, what do you call it, community that's been dedicated to classical and operatic music.
Yeah. So your earliest musical experience were in the classical world?
From my family's point of view,
Mm.
I was always hearing brass band music just as a kid, but my mom's sister, my aunt, she taught piano and voice and classical voice. Like I said, my dad studied opera and sang in a group, and they would do recitals around the city. And the stuff that they would play in the house was mostly classical music and spiritually based music. That's what I heard a lot growing up in the house. I was the one that came in and started playing jazz on the record players, man. And it was funny because on Sundays, man, I'd want to listen to my Clifford Brown and Miles Davis, and my grandmother would be like, "Not today. This is the Lord's day. We're not going to listen to that music today. We're only going to listen to the Lord's music today." I'm like, okay.
That's funny. So, your discovery of jazz, was it just kind of organic, just being surrounded by it, or how did you come to be a fan of jazz music as a kid?
Well, no, it was a combination of things. I mean, I had already heard, obviously, the traditional forms of the music just because of the venues that I would see. Walking down Frenchman Street, I would hear
Sure.
Teddy Riley, great trumpet player, or oh man, I can't think of the other trumpet player's name. Another guy who's actually was a friend of my father's. Uh, he used to play at the famous door. I'd see him all the time, just standing on the corner. But it wasn't until I went to high school and started really learning at the Arch High School under Ellis Marcellus that I learned about Clifford Brown and Miles Davis and all of those guys. That's when he introduced me to that. That created a big shift in my life. It created a big shift in a few ways. I was a naive kid thinking that if you accomplish something great in this country, you would be rewarded for it. And I remember back then feeling like there was a secret society that had been kept from me, because there were so many musicians that I didn't know about that were amazing musicians that did like amazing work, and they weren't household names, and that confused me as a kid. It's like, hold on just for a second.
Sure. Yeah.
Can you come back? Sorry about that,
It's all
me.
right.
Um, yeah, but that was a really interesting time in my life because man, it was really confusing. There were so many people that had become household names, but people didn't know who Clifford Brown was. That freaked me out. I'm like, and this dude was in his early 20s when he passed away playing like that. To me, there should have been statues, based around him. Charlie Parker. Most of my friends didn't know who Charlie Parker was. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You
Yeah,
know, uh, that was my first. That was the first time in my life of dealing with you know, the inequity in our culture. And it happened to come from a musical point of view. And it really I can't emphasize it enough. It really woke me up because I kept going, well, wait a minute. How come I don't know about these guys? Whoa, what is this? John Coltrane. People don't
sure.
know about John Coltrane? Oh my God. Now over the years since then, it's gotten better, since then. But back then, man, in the 70s, that was crazy. And this was right off of the heels of that stuff. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it happened like 50 years prior. This was
Right.
right off of the heels of all of that stuff that was happening in the 60s.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting. And I think even still to today, the greater general public wouldn't know the name Clifford Brown or even Charlie Parker, sadly. Um,
Yeah.
which is, still kind of problematic, I think.
It's very problematic, especially, in America for me, because it's our history. You know what I mean? It's American history. And it's a bit frustrating to come over here. I'm in England now, and I'm going to be in Poland tomorrow. And we were in the Netherlands prior to this. And there are huge festivals dedicated to our music, and it's truly, truly interesting to see how that still occurs because, you know, our culture has really given gifts to the world creatively, and a lot of those guys who have given those gifts haven't just been given, the recognition. It's not like looking for anything else but other than recognition. I mean, it's just that simple. Hmm.
Right, right. I mean, at least in an awareness would be nice to start,
Yeah.
greater
Mhm.
awareness. And it is interesting, you mentioned, how the music, and I think maybe you were alluding to it, is somewhat more appreciated in Europe, Japan, and such. And
Mhm.
I always found it very interesting. I didn't even have that realization. I had the fortune of playing with Ted Kurson for quite some time, and Ted was playing $100 gigs here in New Jersey and New York, and he's the Got Milk guy in Poland or whatever.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. No,
very-
listen, I mean, but there were so many guys like that. I remember seeing Ted at the Blue Note when he used to run the jam session.
sure.
But then there were so many other guys like him who were talented guys, had something to say, but it's almost like the business didn't love them back the way they loved the music,
Yeah.
you know. Uh, and that's always a hard thing. It's always a rough thing because when you get to know those guys, when you get to know, especially a guy like Ted, man, he just loved playing music.
Yeah.
It was no big thing. He was a guy that had talent. He's one of those dudes, man. If you get him in a conversation, he's gonna start talking about music.
You like to talk.
What I mean? You know, it's it's funny because when you see it in person, you may not recognize it as that at first. You may recognize it as something else, but the older you get, you go, man, we were all just music nerds. It's just that simple. It's not a big complicated thing. For us, the combination of putting those rhythms, melodies, and harmonies together fascinates all of us. You know, and trying to find new ways of doing that is always the challenge. As an artist.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So if I could just go back to, you had mentioned Ellis Marsalis. Can you
Mhm.
talk about your connection to the Marsalis family?
Oh, I hate those guys, man. They're pains in the asses. Every last one of them.
There's a lot of them.
No, 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 man. We've been like family for years. You know what I mean? I met Winton when I was going to fifth grade. He was going to sixth grade. I met Winton in Branford. So I've been on him for a long time. And Ellis, he tried to make me a piano player years ago. When I
Hmm.
first met him, I was playing piano, and he really tried to get me to go down that road. And I'm like, that's really wasn't what it was for me. And then he finally accepted it, that I was going to be a trumpet player, man. And because I remember he came to one of my gigs. He came to one of my gigs. I can't remember where it was, but anyway. And he came up to me afterwards and he goes, "Man, to think I tried to make you a piano player." You know what I mean? That was an acknowledgement enough, And Ellis has meant a lot to me growing up. It was a this is the thing. There was Ellis Marsalis, there's Roger Dickinson, Kid Jordan, Alvin Batiste, you know, and a few others. They all were like the little village that looked over us. And they all had varying musical tastes and identities. They didn't all do the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
But that was probably a good thing for us to see, to understand that there wasn't just one way of doing things. There was a plethora of paths that you could take, and the cool thing about Ellis was he didn't, you know, he didn't like try to downplay any of them. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was Ellis's thing to me was do the homework, make sure you study, and make your decision about what it is, what's best for you. But do the work first.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And that was that was the thing, you know. Make sure you know what you're doing. That was the whole thing when I was a kid growing up. You know,
Right.
if you
So
brought if you brought peace, man, they'd break it down. You know what I mean?
there was
It's
no
funny.
fun.
It's funny now, but back then, man, you'd be like, God damn. you know, I tell a story all the time about when I studied with Roger and I bring in my homework. My whole goal was to shut him up, to make sure he didn't have nothing to say. So I
Hmm.
would like really pay attention to everything. I had a passion for it. I was learning. I was like, oh, this is cool. Man, I put things together and I write it out and do my stuff, boom, 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 boom. And I bring it to him and he would go, oh, this is nice. He sit there and read, this is nice. Oh man, this is beautiful. Hmm. And then he pull out that red pencil and he goes, but right here.
It's funny, but
Oh man.
that's the stuff that really helps you to become a better musician, is it not? I mean,
Of
those.
course of course it does. You know what I mean? I mean, and that type of relationship was the thing that really helped me to grow, you know. And one of the things about Roger that's really beautiful, man, it's years later, I'd come back to New Orleans and started studying with him again, just going by just to talk.
Hmm.
And man, at a certain point, and this is kind of hard to accept, really. He said at a certain point, he said, "Listen, man, we're colleagues now." You
Hmm.
know, he said, "Let's just go out to dinner and have conversations." You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
That was another one of those moments in my life. It's the reason why I can't forget it. It's like, whoa, colleagues, wait a minute, what are you talking about? You're Roger Dickinson. You know what I mean? But
Yes.
he didn't see me like that. And that's the thing about Ellis and Roger. They never treated us like kids, if that makes sense.
It
They
does.
never told they never told us you have a lot of time. You'll have time. No, that's not what they told us. Their thing was you better be working on something. You need to be working on something.
Hmm.
You need to be in the shit. What are you working on? What are you practicing? What are you playing? Those are the questions we always got. from those guys, and I really, I'm really, really thankful to them for that.
I'm sure. Yeah. So, so why the trumpet? How did it come to be that you became a trumpet? Why did you choose the trumpet?
Man, in my high school, not my high school, my elementary school, Mary Dora Coghill, our principal was uh, Miss Bouise. I can't remember how to spell her name, but she was she was one of these principals that always brought interesting things to our school for us to experience, modern dance, poetry, and we were elementary school kids, you
Hmm.
know, and she brought in a brass band to come play for us, you know, and it was Alvin Alcorn, and I'll never forget it, man. I listened to him play, and I'd been taking piano lessons since I was 5 years old, but I was in fourth grade in elementary school, and I heard him play, and I kept going, the piano can't do that. Piano can't play like that. Piano doesn't have vibrato
Hmm.
like that, So I went home and told my dad I wanted to play the trumpet, man, and he had just rented a piano for us to have in the house. And, I'm a kid, man. I'm in elementary school. I don't understand anything about finances or anything like that. And to my dad's credit, after it hit the fan and he calmed down, he said, "I'll get you a trumpet if you practice it." And he went and got me a horn.
Right, right. But piano has always
Yeah.
been part of your in your lexicon. I mean, you're a very I've seen you perform on the piano and you never gave that up at
Yeah.
all.
No, 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 no. That's when I was studying with Roger. I still had to perform piano pieces and stuff like that back then. And then it quickly turned from piano to composition. You know, it's so interesting because I remember he would literally be on me about my practicing for the piece, or whatever piece I was working on. And
Mhm.
then when I started asking him about how the pieces were constructed, then we started getting into composition, man, and then it just slowly shifted into that, and that became my focus.
Right, right. So, but you've always been able to balance. It seems like you've uh, incredible at balancing the technical ability to play the trumpet and to continue to be a jazz trumpet player along with the composition.
It's a challenge, bro. It's a challenge, because sometimes, when you're sitting down working on your writing projects, that
Mhm.
horn is sitting in the case talking about, "Hey, bro,
Yeah,
I
it's just
haven't
yeah,
seen you in a while."
yeah.
You
Right.
know what I mean? And then the horn gets a little upset and goes, "Hey, man, I got a little something for you next time you pick me up, since we haven't seen each other for a while." You know what I mean? So it is a balance. There is a balance, and you have to pay attention to it. But over the course of time, I kind of learned how to maintain it.
Mm, cool. So one of your earliest professional experiences, I think, was with Lionel Hampton. Is that correct? How did that come
Oh
to?
yeah, I was going to Rutgers University, man, and I got to school early, but I'd applied late, so they didn't have any housing. So Paul Jeffries, who was running the program at the time, let me stay at his house
Hmm,
with him and his wife, and he was playing with Lionel Hampton, and he had a gig, and instead of leaving me at home with his wife, he said, "Man, why don't you come on up?" Because we were on a bus. He said, "Man, why don't you come on up and hang out with us?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So I brought my horn, and man, we got to. I think we were playing down. Well, they were playing down in Philly, outdoor gig, and there was a sound check, a rehearsal, and the trumpet players in the band asked me to pull out my horn so they could hear me play.
hmm,
So, I started playing for them, and next thing you know, Lionel Hampton walks up behind me, and he goes, "Let me hear you play a blues with the piano player." So I started playing with him and improvising, and then next thing you know, he called me for gigs. I was in the band the next week.
hmm. And you were still a teenager at that point, or pretty
Yeah,
young?
18 years old.
Wow. Wow. What was he like as a
Yeah.
person? Did you get to know him a little bit?
He was okay, man. I mean, Hamp was just a guy who loved to play music, and it was interesting being in the band because there were so many great musicians in that band. Frankie Dunlap, who played with Sonny Rollins and played with Thelonious Monk, Curtis Fuller, who played with John Coltrane, Art Blakey, you know what I mean? Oliver Bena, who was a great trumpet player who kind of took me under his wing while I was in the band, Zeke Mullins. Um, and throughout all of that, Lionel was the guy that was leading the band. And he had incredible ears, man. I'll never forget. We were doing a show in Radio City Music Hall in the lobby of the theater. And I got there early and I started playing the piano. And Hamp jumped up on the vibes and started playing with me. He didn't even know what I was playing. I was playing one of my tunes. And he started playing with me, right? And the next thing you know, it sounded like he's playing out of tune. And I'm like, no, I realized he was playing with the music that was
Yeah.
playing in the lobby.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
He's one of those type of dudes. One of those just had amazing ears.
Interesting. Cool. And then if I can ask you about your time with Art Blakey.
Man, that the time with Art Blakey was like, I don't even know how to describe that, bro. It was like boot camp, like really intense boot
Mm,
camp in a certain way. And the only reason why I say that is because it was like fast tracking your career because I met everybody playing with Art Blakey. I was there for 4 years, but I tell people I felt like I aged by 40. I grew up so much, so quickly in that band, you know. Man, look, one of the first gigs we did in not one of the first, but we did a gig in Italy, and Dizzy Gillespie comes to sit in with us. And then we took a break. We had an intermission. And during the intermission, Art goes, hey, Diz, he plays piano. So
mm.
Diz goes, oh, yeah? He said, well, when we go back out, just me and you go out, I'm gonna play piano for you on the ballot, and you play piano for me on the ballot.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people that was the first time you heard vibrato on a piano, man.
All right.
My hands were so nervous. I'm like, this is Dizzy Gillespie, man. And
Yeah,
look, we didn't have cell phones back then, so nobody has a record of it, but that would have been cool
I'm
to,
sure.
to show my kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And then like during at some point with Blakey, I guess he realized you're a fantastic writer and you started to provide a lot of material, right? And I think served as the musical director for.
Yeah, but went and told him before I joined the band, went and told him, said, man, Boo, he writes, he can write. And it says, well, bring your music, go get it out the chest, and we're gonna play it all. But
Okay.
that was the thing about playing with him. The wild part about playing with Art Blakey is that he always wanted us to have put our signature sound on the band. But man, that classic messenger sound was so powerful. It was hard for us to break away from that, you know? I mean, we were playing all of This Is for Albert, all of the Benny Golson and Wayne Shorter arrangements and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
But then he wanted us to do our own thing. And just him with the power of those drums, the way he played, and that three-horn lineup, there was just a sound to that band that we all loved, man, and writing for that band was a lot of fun back then, you know, um, because it helped me out a great deal, like, and then having Art Blakey, man, to help develop your tunes, who could ask for anything better than that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've talked to some others who've served in his band. Was he someone for you who gave a lot of direction or
No, no, hardly any. You know what I mean? Every now and then, if things got really crazy, he'd come in. I remember I was playing the ballad "My Funny Valentine," and I never played the melody because I thought I was Miles Davis. And he said he pulled me aside, said, "Play the melody, man. Somebody wrote it. Play the melody." And then he said, and stop playing that tune because Miles put his stamp all over it. We find you something that you can make your own, you know, but don't play that tune anymore. So I started playing Polka Dots and Moonbeams, you know, which is another tune that I really love.
Yeah.
But no, he let us. The analogy that I always used to use with Art Blakey is that like being in that band was like being on a dining room table, right? You could run all over that table free as you want. But as soon as you got to the edge, he would say, and give you a little smack, and then you head back to the center of the table.
Mm,
You know what I mean? But as long as you were on the table, you had free reign of doing anything you wanted to do.
very interesting. Yeah, that seems consistent with pretty much everyone's discussion on having been in his band. Um,
Hmm.
that's great. Cool. So then, of course, a big part of your career has been film composition. How do you make that shift? I mean, there's been a few jazz musicians, Quincy Jones, obviously, Stanley
Right.
Clarke, even Ellington, I think, wrote for film.
Yep.
How did you make a shift to that?
Well, I think the shift comes about just because of an interest in music, period. You know what I mean? It's like going back to that thing I was telling you about growing up in New Orleans, where you hear classical music, you hear jazz, you hear all these different types of things. So while I was a jazz lover and loved the music, and I was a jazz musician, you know, I wasn't just a jazz advocate, if that makes sense. You know
Makes
what I
sense.
mean? So for me, when it came time to write music for film, I went back to my classical background. I went back to the things that I knew, and then I was combining all of those things together. The harmony from my jazz career with the thought of orchestration, from my classical background. And I loved how film gave me an opportunity to grow with that.
Mm,
Um, And having that experience, man, was something else because, you know, it's one thing to like write, but and the way I was taught, Roger used to tell me, look, if it works on the piano, it's going to work when you translate it to the orchestra. And that's why I always write from the piano, right? And the fascination comes in like after you get your lines, your melody lines, your harmony, emotion, all of that stuff. The orchestration is really the fun part for me because it's not just what you're saying, but it's how you're going to say it. That's what the orchestration does to me,
mm,
and it's literally like cooking in a sense. You get a
sure.
little spice from this with a little seasoning from that, and put that together, and that creates those things together create a certain sound, you know, and that's the fascination of those putting those different possibilities together to help tell a story.
Sure, sure. So, and when it comes to orchestration and arrangement, um, that's mainly all you, or do you work with a team that helps you with that?
No, it's all me, but Miles Goodman, who was my mentor in the film business, taught me that you always get an orchestrator, because you just want to have unbiased set of ears around,
Hmm.
you know, because and I understand what that is, because sometimes you get so focused on what it is you're doing, you can't see the forest for the trees, you know,
Sure,
and having an orchestrator around who just can sometimes just pose a question. Hey, man, what about using such and such here, man? It'll really help bring out that line. And then it'll make you go, you know what? I've been overlooking that. Hey, man, let's go through some other spots where we think we could use something similar. You know, that's where having an orchestrator really comes in handy for me. I'm not the type of person just to hand over a melody and say orchestrated. No, no,
right.
no, no, no. Yeah, because for me, I like coloring the melodies. I like putting together those combinations, creating the counter lines, deciding who plays those counter lines. I really like that part.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. So was it your connection with Spike Lee that was that your first sort of foray into film?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, he heard me playing the piano and asked if he could use that melody in a scene, and then asked if I could write a string arrangement for it. And then that's how it all started.
Hmm.
It all started that way, and it's been a great experience ever since.
Yeah, I mean, so like if you could just walk me through a little bit of the process of perhaps like working with a Spike Lee, whose movies you've done so many of. Is it the film comes first, the music is comes a little before? Do you have a stockpile of things that you give or
Generally, the film comes first. I mean, some people give you scripts, and sometimes I write off the scripts, but inevitably it doesn't really work that much because when you read a script, it's your movie that you're
mm,
seeing. You know what I
sure,
mean?
sure.
Um, but it does give you insight into the story. And once the film is shot and they start to edit it, then we sit down and we start to figure out where music goes, what type. And we have conversations about what type of music, what's the approach, you
Hmm.
know, or any project, and then with Spike, I'm kind of left to my own devices until we get into the studio. I mean, I'll give him some melodic content and he'll assign those themes to different characters and situations. But after that, man, he doesn't really hear anything until we get to the studio,
Mm.
which is unusual because most people they want to hear everything, but not Spike,
He has a
And the wild part about it, when somebody gives you that type of room, it kind of makes you work harder, you know. 'Cause, listen, anybody gives you that type of freedom in that business, man, you don't want to let them down, you
mm.
know, because there's a certain level of trust that they have in you. So you want to make sure that you step up to the plate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems like obviously he has a certain trust in you, and
Yeah,
he comes from a background that includes jazz. His father being a jazz musician.
exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And what about like so? I know like some of your music, for example, the album Breathless deals with raising awareness, if you will, and obviously Spike Lee's movies certainly do the same.
Yeah.
Um, is there a certain I don't really know how to frame this, but is it I mean, does it turn you on in some way that the content of his movies and just knowing that you're part of a process that's going to turn out to sort of help people to be more aware?
Well, no, it's an honor working on all these projects. You know what I mean? It's a blessing, man. When you work on something like Malcolm X, which is the second movie I ever scored in my life,
Mm.
that was huge. That was really huge. And in doing that, it really made me feel like I was a part of something important. You know. Then when we did Four Little Girls, I'll never forget that. That documentary was extremely important.
Hmm.
Obviously, when the levees broke, Hurricane Katrina, that documentary, all of those projects, and there's something like Miracle at St. Anna, which honored the Buffalo Soldiers, was an amazing thing. I remember having the premiere in New York and watching so many of those soldiers show up and be proud, you know, at what it was that they saw that we had put together. Uh, I remember saying that writing that score was kind of like a big love letter and a thank you to all of those guys, that had given their lives for our country. Uh, so yeah, I mean, and then when you look at the cinematic excellence that Spike has brought to the world of film and the uniqueness, everybody wants to copy the Dolly shot now. You know what I mean? Um, there's so many things that he's done that have become part of the film lexicon, and to be a part of that is a true honor, man. And it's something you really can't describe. You just feel blessed and lucky to have been there, and been given a talent to help support, his artistic vision.
Sure, sure. So I mean, um, in your own music and in jazz music, instrumental music, um, how could you use? There's been several albums, and you've done some stuff where the music has some sort of political connotation or social. to help to raise social consciousness, like perhaps like a John Coltrane's Alabama, perhaps. How is it? How I always was curious how instrumental music, how you can do that through instrumental music.
Well, it's all about understanding how it all functions. And when you study composition, it's one of the things you learn. You
Hmm.
learn the sound of a major chord versus the sound of a minor chord
Right.
versus the sound of a diminished chord or a diminished chord. You know what I mean? Or a sus chord. All of those things carry a certain type of vibration and indication. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yep.
So the whole thing about it is how do you use those things in succession to really create a tone? So when you look at Alabama, that drone starts and then train starts to play that melody over that drone, and it sounds like a chant.
Hmm.
It has a very chant-like quality. And then you contrast that with something like Take Five, right? You know what I mean? Which has like a more a brighter feeling to it. It exudes joy and happiness in a way
Right.
because it's in a major key with an odd meter that kind of keeps you engaged in it. It has an infectious kind of thing to it. So when you start to understand how all of those things work in music, those are the things that help you kind of craft a sound or a tone for any given thing that you want to say musically.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand. I mean, and how much is the in programmed music such as Alabama or something, the title obviously has a big bearing on what people's impression might be.
Well, the titles are really important to me, you know, because of that, because it's really important to give an indication to the listener, what the musical composition is about, where it stems from.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, so with an album such as Breathless, I mean, there's no gray areas to, perhaps what you were trying to achieve, which I think you did wonderfully. Can you talk about that project?
Well, it was an interesting thing because when I put the band together, the E Collective band, we
Mhm.
initially were just trying to inspire some young kids to play electronic music on a high level. You
Mm.
know, initially that was the thing. But, you know, I remember we were on tour in Europe and I think Mike Brown was shot. There was a number of young people, I can't remember the orders, but there was a bunch of young people who were shot and killed by police. And we just kept feeling like anybody else, enough was enough, man. And all of a sudden, the music and the meaning of it just started to change. And we
Mm.
felt like we needed to make our own statement about it because at the time, and almost like to until today, there was one person who was covered in the news every day.
Yeah.
That's all they talked about, you know? And it was frustrating because to me, this is a huge looming issue over our country that's not really being discussed in the way that it should. So, we decided to make our little stand about it, which allowed us to go out and talk about it wherever we went when we were touring. Tell
Mm.
me what breathless mean. Well, this is what it's about. It's about this and how we're not talking about gun violence in our country, how we're not dealing with this issue of how, African American youth um, are being misidentified by police and mowed down, because of impressions, not because of anything solid, but just because of impressions. And it was an interesting time, given the fact that we got a chance to talk about it. You know, uh, so it was helpful. It was hopefully it was helpful. Then we did a follow-up album called Live, where we went to some cities and tried to have some civic engagement about the topic. you know. Uh, but look, that's what that's what my predecessors have done,
Yeah.
in the world of music. I just try to follow their lead.
Mm, awesome. And then to kind of bring it back full circle, I mean, opera. How did you uh how did you get into writing an opera? It takes a lot of courage to write an opera.
Need a lot of courage, a lot of stupidity.
Uh,
you know. Um, I was just I was asked by Jim Robinson, who was working at Opera Theater St. Louis, and Tim O'Leary and Stephen Lord. You know, they remember that I had a conversation with Gene Dobbs Bradford, who was running Jazz St. Louis. But years ago, Gene had picked me up, and we were driving around St. Louis. We had a conversation, and he remembered that I told him that my father was in the opera. So when Opera Theater St. Louis wanted to expand their palette by doing the jazz opera,
mhm,
uh, they called Gene. And Gene gave him my name. You know, oddly enough, Jim Robinson was a fan of my album "When the Levees Broke,"
mhm,
Taylor Bronx Will. Um, you know that that album piqued his curiosity, and man, they came and asked me. I'll never forget it. We were in that little cafe in New York, dude. And when Jim asked me to write an opera, man, I thought that dude. I'm like, wait a minute, you got the wrong person. You mean me? But man, it's been such a great experience ever since that I've loved every moment of it, and I've learned a great deal from it. I never thought I'd be a theater guy, you know what I mean? But here I am.
yeah, it's funny how some things kind of happen organically that way through music, you know?
Yeah, and it's wild because it starts to awaken something in you didn't realize was there.
Mhm,
You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
like walking around the building and listening to the baritones rehearse or practice their parts. I go, man, it reminds me of my dad and his guys. It brought me back to having that experience that I had when I was a kid. Listening to these men sing. You know, and then now, watching it evolve into these huge productions is crazy to me. It,
mhm,
it's insane that I'm even here doing it. But while I'm here, I'm gonna try to do the best I can for it because I feel like I owe it to my dad. You know, if my dad were around, man, we'd have to chain him to his seat, make sure he didn't run up on stage
wow.
to sing one of the roles.
But it's pretty interesting with jazz and its connection to opera. And I always think back to Scott Joplin, you know, who was so dead set on trying to present a ragtime opera and was just, he just wasn't able to get it done. And then, of course, like a James P. Johnson was able to in some level. But it's pretty miraculous
Well,
that,
there's another. There's a bunch of Harry, William Grant Still.
yeah,
I'm still,
absolutely. Hmm.
you know, I heard one of his pieces prior to my piece going to the Met in St. Louis, and I loved it, and didn't know what it was, and I found out it was a piece called Highway One. Then I get to the Met, and I saw what three of his operas were rejected in the 30s, and
Right.
one of them was Highway One.
Yeah. Yeah. And he was, I mean, talk about a remarkable talent, William Grant Still. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. All right. I don't want to keep you too long. I appreciate your time. Any current projects you're currently working on that you want to discuss?
Well, we're finding a topic for the third opera right now. I'm working on a couple of TV projects, but that's here nor there. And then I'm, working on some new music for the E Collective. It's about
Hmm.
time for us to go back into the studio.
Right. And is that going to be so the last one? I'm not sure if it was the last one, forgive me, but the Turtle Island Quartet one, Absence, that was
That was the
two,
last one.
that was the last one. Yeah, it's phenomenal. And with that
Thank
one,
you.
I think it was you trying to really pay homage to Wayne Shorter in some way, right?
Sure. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah,
Hmm.
that was a love letter to Wayne, and we got a chance to do it before he passed away. We actually went to his house and hung out with him, man, before we actually started the session, and that was beautiful. Wayne was the type of person, man. Some of the guys hadn't met him before,
Hmm.
and when I brought them all over to Wayne's house, you know, and we just hung out with him, man, for about an hour or two. Man, they all were outside going, thank you, thank you. That's just the type of person Wayne was. You know what I
Right.
mean? You hung around him for a little bit, and you just felt like your life was so much richer because of just being around this dude.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting that you said. I just did a show on Speak No Evil, and
Okay.
and we were trying. I was speaking with another saxophone player. We were trying to figure out what it is about Wayne Shorter's composition and playing, and that album in particular that made it so special. And it's like all we could really keep coming back to was his personality, his musical personality, because it sort of defines traditional analysis. We couldn't lock into. It was just,
Well, here's the thing about it, and because I used to teach when I was teaching, I used to use Wayne as an example all the time. He really was a great composer in terms of how knowing how to develop musical ideas. The thing that was beautiful about it, he figured out a way to how to do it in his own language. That was the thing. But when you look at all of his composition from his early days until, man, his last breath, the compositional structures and techniques were all there. They're all there. You know what I mean? But they're
Yeah.
done in the language of Wayne Shorter. That's the thing that blew me away. Like, you don't see him writing bebop lines. You know what I mean?
Mm-mm.
Oh, he found his own language and his own way of speaking musically, man. And that to me, that's the goal to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unlike what anyone else did. And it's when you look at it on paper, it's almost like, how's this going to work? And then when he plays, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So finally, in your opinion, what do you think is the future of jazz music?
Who knows? Who knows? I know it's bright though. There's a lot of, Ambrose Akinmusire, Miguel Zenon, Marcus and EJ Strickland.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, the list is endless, man. Lionel Lewake. There's a lot of guys doing a lot of great things, and they are going to be influencing the next generation. So I think it's really healthy. There's it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds because you know the other part of it too. There's another side of it. You see Christian McBride run a Newport Jazz Festival.
Hmm.
Jason Lawrence is in DC. Wynton is at Lincoln Center. I'm at SF Jazz. Victor Goins is in St. Louis, and I think Terry Lynn Carrington is in Boston. So now you
Hmm.
have all of these organizations with African American artistic directors. You know, I think that's going to have a big impact on the development of the music in the future. But I all look at it. I look at all of it as being a good thing. You know what I mean? I think the future is bright, and it's going to be forever expanding. Because we were taught by some of the greatest minds on the planet. You
Hmm.
know, now that this stuff is in our hands, it's upon us to take our experiences and utilize them to the fullest.
Sure. Cool. So did I miss anything?
No,
All right, man. Listen, congrats on the award,
thank
and
you,
thanks for all the great music. I appreciate your time today.
thank you, bro. I appreciate it too, man. Take
All right.
care.
Nice speaking with you.
All
Take
right.
it easy. Bye now.